Ladies, gentlemen, they, thems, good evening and welcome to the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Sibs Matiela. We're here to talk about all things property so we can help you along your property journey because here at privateproperty.co.za, we love to connect you to the heart of property. And that's what we're doing today. I don't know very much on the subject. I'm learning with you. We're all learning as we go. But what I do is bring in all of the experts to answer all of our burning questions. Today is no different. We are speaking to Hayley Ivins Downs, actually, who is the head of digital at Lightstone Property, and we're talking about property stats and trend forecasting. Hayley, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. Tell me, you're the head of digital at Lightstone Property. What do you guys do? What is the head of digital? What's up with Lightstone?
So Lightstone started 15 years ago, and we basically developed valuation models for property. Then obviously did a lot of work with the banks where it helps grant a bond. So they receive offer to purchasers, they use our valuation model in terms of that process, they then grant the bonds. We developed a wealth of insights and reports that we then started sharing with the real estate industry, and we're very focused around making sure that the industry on real estate has all of the most important information to help them achieve what they're needing to do.
So Lightstone Properties is a leader in property research in South Africa. How do you collect your data?
So we get our data from the deeds office on a monthly basis and actually updates on a weekly basis, and we then clean it. We have a whole
clean
team
data.
of clean data. We basically map it. We make sure that it's right, that we find spelling issues, all of that. It's all cleaned. We then obviously also map it into the property type. Becomes really important to understand what's residential and what we say is what's non-res. Mm-hmm. And within the non-res is your commercial. So we do a lot of work in terms of making sure that that data is usable.
The Real Estate Industry Summit, which is currently underway, and you were speaking. Can you tell me more about what you were speaking about?
So it was really around market insights. So I gave a view in terms of how the property market's actually doing. We spoke a little bit around semigration. So semigration's a really interesting topic. There's a lot of interest ever since COVID. You know, people don't really have to go into the office to work anymore. You can work remotely. And we found that it actually sparked a lifestyle change. People had the opportunity to move to smaller towns, which we saw. And we saw basically a movement out of Gauteng to Western Cape principally, which was really interesting. So there's almost been this whole movement of people that have decided they needed a lifestyle change after COVID, and they've moved. So we've been tracking that. Semigration is not new. It's been happening all the time. But the big change that we noticed was Gauteng to Western Cape. So that's what we picked up on. Then we spoke a little bit around the first-time home buyer. So first-time home buyer, we're actually seeing kind of the uptick. We saw a big uptick last year. It was the perfect market for a first-time home buyer to buy. The interest rate was at an all-time low, 50 years, it's never been that low. You could actually afford to buy a property. So they were buying principally in your Gauteng and your Western Cape as well. And also a mix between your freehold and your sectional title, which is also very interesting. And then the other hot topic is always the foreign buyers. So people always have a view that there's a lot of foreign buyers coming in. Obviously, South Africa is very affordable from a property perspective.
Yes.
And where are these foreign buyers buying, and are there a lot of them? And in actual fact, when we look at the numbers, as an example, 2022, there were about 9,500 purchases that were foreign buyers out of 375,000 property transfer purchases. So a really small percentage when we look at that quantum of actual foreign buyers. The interesting piece, though, is everybody assumes foreign buyers are buying in the Western Cape. But in actual
Camps Bay and Clifton.
Absolutely. They do feature. But in actual fact, the two high suburbs are Sandhurst and Athol in Johannesburg. So very interesting in terms of where they're actually purchasing.
I actually want to get to that in a little bit, but I'm glad that you touched on first-time home buyers, because that's obviously one of the focuses of this podcast, is to really introduce the concept of making property accessible to first-time home buyers who sort of are apprehensive about getting into the market for various reasons that are very relevant. So we try and get people on to sort of go, listen, it's not as difficult as you think that it's going to be, and this is completely something that you can do. So while we're on that, I suppose what I would ask is, you know, we've just had the midterm budget speech that happened this week, Wednesday. We've got the repo rate that went up by about 75 basis points. And I expect that the forecast that we were looking at sort of at the beginning of 2022, and as you're saying, you know, at the time during COVID, when it was the lowest in 15 years, we're now at a very different place. So with all of that in mind, forecasting now into the future, what does it look like for first-time home buyers going into now the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023?
It does become a lot more challenging in the sense that we're almost looking at pre-COVID interest rate time. You're essentially in that space again, which means as a first-time home buyer, you either going to buy or rent. So the rental market's now picking up because once again, interest rates are up. It becomes a bit more difficult to purchase that house that you would like. The affordability is not quite there. The real thing that I do want to say though is if you are able to purchase a property, it's definitely a worthwhile investment. Property is an investment, and it's worthwhile to get into it early because it is a long-term investment. So rather opt, if you can afford it and the location is good, to purchase a property as opposed to renting a property. Essentially, you're paying off somebody else's bond when you could be paying off your own bond. But yes, it is going to tighten, and we anticipate that the interest rates are going to be going up next year as well.
Oh boy.
So 2024 at this point is probably when we're going to see the drop in the interest rate again. So just to be mindful of that as well. Obviously, people that have purchased last year, being a first-time home buyer, are going to start feeling a bit of a crunch and a bit of a tightening of the belt with the interest rate. But to push through it, it's an investment. And if you can carry on through, it'll be good. But yes, it does change the dynamic for a first-time home buyer.
So do you think there'll be more of an uptake or like a sort of...
I think it'll start flattening. And I actually think first-time home buyers might opt for rentals as opposed to purchasing until interest rate drops again to a level that makes it affordable.
I'm curious what you think, Hayley, when you speak about semigration and this trend. Obviously, those who can afford to sort of move closer to the coast or wherever are doing so. But when we look at it in terms of a first-time home buyer and how we're all in this rat race together, so to speak, and now we've discovered, look, you can work from home. You can be a digital nomad. You do want to invest in a property, but perhaps you can do it in Naboomspruit or Uppington or, you know, in the Northern Cape where there are beaches that we didn't know existed until COVID.
Kalahari sand dunes.
Yeah, there we go. So would you say that's something people should maybe, you know, look into? Because obviously property prices further out of the city centers, the Cape Towns and the Joburg and the big metros, you know, those prices are much cheaper and you can get like a nice
big house,
a mansion, and just slowly redo it with the cheap materials that they sell in the one hardware store in the town. Is that something you would encourage?
Yes. I mean, if you are able to work from home and that you don't need to be in the city for whatever reason, then, you know, it's always good to go and explore somewhere else and be at a smaller town or even a larger town. But just to move somewhere where you have a bit of a lifestyle change. What we will also start seeing with the interest rate going up is property prices will start leveling out and in certain areas will be under pressure. So you might be able to pick up a property that, you know, was expensive last year, but might be a bit more affordable now. So, you know, it's definitely something. If
you're there a date you can put on that, like a specific date? No, like no. June 2024 or something.
No, we don't actually know when that's going to happen. But that's the sentiment, is that 2024 we will see that the interest rates will come down. But next year it's not. They're going to go up still.
Okay, so back to sort of the foreign investment now in property in South Africa. Again, the assumption, the Camps Bays and the, but it's actually Athol and...
Athol and Sandhurst in Johannesburg, which are also featuring at the top. So interesting also just to be aware when we talk about foreign buyers, we automatically think European, UK, American. It's also African. We've got a lot of foreign buyers coming from Nigeria and countries like that can actually afford it. The South African rand.
Unlike us.
Yes, so it's certainly worthwhile for them to purchase a property in South Africa.
What drives them to do that?
It could be various factors. They could want a holiday house. They could want a house where they're running a business in South Africa. They might have multiple businesses in South Africa. They might want to run a boutique hotel. They might, there's various reasons why foreign buyers are actually buying. They could also have a summer house and a winter house. You hear a lot of that in terms of, move to better climates when it's good.
Yeah.
So there's various reasons why they purchase.
I suppose you hear a lot of talk about sort of foreign buyers with their big money sort of pricing South Africans out of the market. Is that a thing?
No, I think South Africans, there are South Africans that can afford the market, but absolutely, if a foreign buyer comes in, they certainly have...
With $1 trillion monies.
They do certainly have a lot more disposable income and cash at their exchange rate, so... Yeah.
And we just don't. Not yet. Not some of us. Yes. It's fine. I'm playing the Powerball and the Lotto. And maybe this weekend will be my weekend. Listen, what have been the dominant trends, both residential and commercially speaking, in 2022?
So 2022, we've come off the back of a really good year for residential in 2021. The beginning of the year 2022, up until probably September 2022, we've had a really good year as well. We've started to seeing the market cooling, and that's obviously linked to interest rate increase. So buyers they're kind of re-looking in terms of what they can afford. So that's kind of on the residential side. On the commercial side, it's actually quite interesting. So commercial took a really hard knock during COVID. You can understand all of the empty offices. Office was not a great commercial entity to have. We are, however, starting to see some pockets of revival on office, and it's actually quite interesting where they're actually converting offices to apartments. There's certain areas where they've started doing that, but I think it's going to be a while still until we see that. On the industrial side, they're okay in terms of commercial, and then on the retail side, there's always a question mark as to all the shopping centers and how do they all survive. So,
how do they?
It's always an interesting concept.
Well, you have the data.
We have some of the data. We don't focus on commercial. We focus more on the residential. But it is a question, that generally gets asked. And you do see shopping centers that go through a bad patch. You start seeing the empty stores, and then they almost do a rejuvenation and a change of tenant, and it picks up again. But that's kind of what we're seeing. So we anticipating the commercial is going to start slowly picking up, the industrial and the retail more so than the office. And obviously within certain nodes, I think the big thing is employees encouraging people back in the office. I think that in itself is probably going to drive a bit more of an uptick on the office market, but that'll take time.
I mean, realistically speaking, people are sort of veering away from that traditional model of waking up, being stuck in traffic for an hour to drive to a place that's not very close to where you live. Exactly. When you can wake up in the morning, make your cup of coffee, do a spot of yoga, open your laptop, and work from wherever you are. I mean, I would want to put all of my money into making that space all of the things that I need it to be instead of the other thing. But maybe that's just me. What is your top tip for any property investor in 2023? What do we need to look more closely at, and what do we need to reconsider?
So if you're an investor in property, then you really need to understand location. Location is absolutely key. You need to understand the areas where you're actually going to drive value in the property that you purchase. And the other big caveat is transfer fees and all the costs that go along buying a property. So if you're averse to spending that money, then buy off plan, and you will actually see a much bigger return. If the location is right, then buying off plan is definitely better in that sense. And we're seeing a lot of developments. So I would really kind of say as an investor, it's worthwhile doing that.
Okay. I'm going to ask you one last thing before I let you go. Hayley, obviously you've done the research. Lighthouse Property has done the research. Are we seeing more of a trend towards being off the grid and sort of greening our homes, greening our buildings, or is that it's not going to take?
No, I think there is quite a big push. I think where it's sitting though is probably in a certain income band at this stage. It's certainly not a cheap exercise to go off the grid. To get solar in with the battery power, as well as water, and to have the pumps. This is not a cheap exercise. And as a result, I think you're going to see it in certain income bands, which means kind of higher up in the level of, we kind of anticipating your 1.7 million, 2 million house upwards is probably your homeowners that will start certainly considering that option, or even part of that option, whether they kind of have some level of protection against all of the load shedding and the electricity being down.
And the water shedding.
And everything else. So there is a lot of interest in the market. It's just really around affordability in terms of getting it done.
Do you see any actual property developments going in that direction? So they go, we're going to build this mega complex, but in the complex, we're going to make sure that you're always powered up, you always have water, you always have Wi-Fi, there's always security. Are any of the property developers going in that direction and saying, listen, we can guarantee that you will have this if you live here?
Yes, there are some developments that are certainly going that, and actually quite a few that have opted. You see them all being built with solar panels on the top. So they're certainly looking at going that route, which is obviously a huge plus for anybody purchasing a property.
Absolutely.
And so it is a route that they're taking. Not sure in terms of the cost, but it is a route. It's obviously in demand. So it's what people need.
Yeah, when I find the million monies that I need, I'll buy there. Thank you so much, Hayley Ivins Downs, for joining us from Lighthouse Properties. This has been very enlightening, and I can't wait to speak to you again in the future.
Great. Thank you.
Listen, that's all I've got for you today. Tune in to the next episode of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Sibs Matiela. Until then, good night.